tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Diving into continuing our study together. We've been talking in recent weeks about the preparatory stages in a way and some of the basic skills in meditation practice, and really pointing toward what I think of as the foundational aspect of meditation practice, which comes under the broad umbrella of this word samādhi. Samādhi is a Pali and Sanskrit word used in many of the South Asian traditions, including Buddhism, but also in the many Hindu traditions, in the Jain and Sikh traditions. Samadhi, as the early Buddhist tradition uses it, so in the language of Pali, refers to an aspect of meditation, of meditative cultivation, that is about the consolidation or bringing together of the factors in the inner world that we think of as attention, awareness, mindfulness. It brings together a kind of witness stance where, when we're well, at least well enough, in psychologically, energetically, we have this capacity to witness or observe what's happening without being completely caught up in it, without being beyond the capacity to make wise choices in relation to what's happening. So there's a witness quality. But primarily, samadhi, if we think of it in terms of this coming together, it's a kind of focus, really, right? Focus in the way that our attention and perception qualities have this habitual autonomic function of surveying the landscape. So part of what we do as animals is part of our attention is often open to the field of space and social connections that are around us. And we're constantly scanning this field around us for a lot of things, but including the perceptions of threat and danger. And so this is the part of attention that's tied to the autonomic nervous system. This is, some folks say this is part of the natural result of us having become upright animals, where our necks swivel in the horizontal plane, and what we can do is we can see far toward the horizon, and we can scan the horizon in the kind of horizontal plane for threat. So we have this visual perception that operates primarily in this big horizontal plane. And of course, then you can look up and down, but there's mostly this spreading out of attention. And how our eyes work. We have this peripheral attention way out here, where you can see what's happening almost to a full kind of 180-degree stretch of what's around. We're not like those, is it flounder? I'm not sure. There's these fish that can actually, their eyes are on both sides of their head and they can see two different things at once. When I first heard that, I was a kid. I was like, I want to figure out like how to do that. And I was like, can I, this was my experiment as a kid, was can I concentrate on what I see out of my peripheral vision over there and over there at the same time? Can I simultaneously think about that and that? And it's very difficult to do, right? We're not that kind of animal. We're not flounders, but we have this, we have the kind of horizon scanning perception that we have. And of course we have our hearing, which is 360, right? Which really hears in all directions and is very finely attuned to directions. When I was in one of the the somatic trauma trainings that I did, we did a really interesting exercise at one point where a person would stand with their eyes closed in the middle of an open space, and their partner, the person working with them in the exercise, had a bunch of bean bags. And your task was to throw the beanbag to a spot somewhere in a circumference around the person about 10 feet out at different points, like on the clock. So if you're standing in the center of the clock, say you're facing 12 o'clock, your partner would throw the beanbag to like 4 o'clock, back there somewhere. And then you would see if you can point to it. And what we would find out is for most people, there's some place in the circle around you where you can't point to it as precisely. There's often a kind of perceptual, energetic hearing blind spot somewhere in the circle. And if you were to take that as seed information for like a somatic therapy session, you might often be able to you might come upon information that at some point something threatening or dangerous or startling happened or came from that direction. That's where I first saw the car when we had that accident, or that's where the person came toward me who was threatening, or whatever it was. That's where my boss was standing when I got fired, that time. And there's this way that our perception actually tracks what's happening all around. So we have that kind of perception, and it logs kind of karmically, right? It logs our history spatially around us. So in samadhi, part of what we have to do, we have this aspect of our attention that is scanning for threat, assessing the environment. Part of what we have to do is bring that quality, which by nature is roving, is constantly moving. We have to bring that to steadiness or stillness. In a sense, we have to bring in the guards or the scouts that have wandered around the countryside. It's like, okay, well, now it's time to bring everyone into the castle and settle down for a meal, a rest, a festival, a long winter's nap. And so how do we do this? Part of thinking about meditation in this way comes from not accepting, in a way, the difficulties in meditation as being inevitable. I think really often folks find it hard to concentrate, hard to settle into samadhis, hard to gather in the threads of the mind, lots of distraction, lots of fantasy, lots of regret, and lots of having the attention turned toward other sensations, other things pinging the attention. And I want us to really think about what might be going on in nervous systems like that many of us carry and work with, that are making coming together so difficult, and how we can actually encourage that coming together to happen with more ease and more skill. And so I'm emphasizing this aspect of the nervous system that's trying to keep us safe, because I think this is one of the main things that's underlying the tendency toward distraction, restlessness, desire, grasping, looking outside ourselves, looking outside this moment, analyzing the moment, remembering other moments, fantasizing about future moments. All of this, in a way, rides on the underlying dukkha or painfulness that is not being able to settle, not being able to really come together in this moment. And so Why can't I come together in this moment? What's happening? The part of the nervous system that is attending outward, constantly scanning for danger, but also looking for, you know, looking for what will be better, which is, I think, is a different kind of, recoiling from danger, like constantly looking for sensory stimulus, what's going to be more interesting. I'm unable to stay with that which is boring or plain. Attention gets pulled toward the next shiny perception that appears. I think all of this, in a way, is a function of what we can think of as the sympathetic nervous system, the self-protective aspects of our energetic body, being stuck in the on position, stuck in the vigilant self-protective stance. So why is it hard to settle? Some part of me doesn't trust that I can turn inward in a way that's going to be satisfying, nourishing, safe, easeful. And so from the somatic nervous system language, if we think about the sympathetic nervous system, which is the activating part of our self-protective mechanisms, what we need to find is deactivation of that. And I've talked about this a bunch in different ways. We return to it many different, in many different forms. We're looking for not just coming out of distraction, but actually deactivating the energy that leads to distraction. There's an energy that leads to fantasizing about the future. It's not that I want to just cut off the fantasy about the future as not being useful in this moment if I'm trying to meditate. What I really want to do is I want to figure out what's going on that my energy keeps whipping up or gathering or activating toward future, and let that calm. Really bring that to steadiness. There's this word that always goes along with samadhi, which is often translated as tranquility or quiescence or serenity, and it's the word samatha. Samatha. And it has a similar set of meanings around bringing together, gathering in. Samatha really is the calming side of concentration practice. Concentration is largely composed of aspects of relaxation and calm, together with enough energy and alertness to remain clear in the attention. So relaxation without sleepiness, calm without dullness, right? Calm and alert, calm and bright. And so we can feel in the tendency toward distraction, fantasy, regret, remorse, proliferation of thought and emotional reactivity of lots of kinds. We can feel how there's an energy of excess activation. Right? The body-mind is trying to do something. The chitta is trying to do something. And our task is to make the conditions for that energy to deactivate. Right? Not just to come into bodily calm, which is part of that, but to really come out of the activation that is self-protective, that is vigilant, that is mobilizing toward what can be called, what are sometimes called self-protective motor plans. The thing that the sympathetic nervous system does is not just scan the world for threat and try to keep us safe and interested, but it activates the musculature. It moves blood around the body, moves power into the limbs so that we can do the things needed for self-protection. The calm that we're looking for in meditation requires not just a suppression of thought, or it doesn't really require a suppression of thought. What it requires is the actual calming of the nervous system. And so this means that we have to hook into this protective layer that's vigilant and anxious, and find the conditions for that layer to um, to really let go of the habitual task of trying to keep ourselves safe, interested, curious, engaged with the external world. And this is part of what the texts mean when they say that samadhi, the bringing of the chitta, or the heart mind, into immersion or absorption, is characterized by seclusion. Seclusion means seclusion of the senses, seclusion from the hindrances. And so this is, points to what would it be like for the externally facing senses, seeing and hearing primarily, since smell and taste are more internal. Sensation is different in a certain way, partly because we use sensation so often as a meditative anchor. But let's talk about seeing and hearing. What would it be like for seeing and hearing to not just be not the focus of attention, but to really pull back the aspect of perception that's reaching outward at all? In deep meditative absorption, called jhana, for some folks who are both very talented and have pristine conditions for these absorptions to arise, for folks whose absorptions are very strong, this can lead to not even hearing folks talking who are nearby, or reporting, really not being aware of the movement of the senses at all. And that's a very deep state. Hardly anyone practices to that point, or needs to. It's not necessary to, by many folks' reckonings. But it's possible. Right? It's possible to pull attention back from the externally facing senses, so much so that they really fade to the background of perception. And you might already know what this is like. I remember as a kid being, so absorbed in reading the book that I was reading, that, I would, this sound would slowly kind of emerge and impinge upon what I was doing, until finally I realized that, one of my parents was like 3 feet away, being like, "John!" What? I was reading. They'd be like, "I've said your name 10 times." And I was like, I was absorbed in my book, And so it's not radical to propose that this is possible. But what we want to find is the kind of absorption in a consolidated internal space, in the meditative space, that we might more easily find in flow states around external activities, art making, reading, engaging in something. So seclusion is to draw in or pull back engagement with the objects of the senses. And this means also, the sense of cognition, discursive thought primarily, and inner images. What does it mean to pull back attention from discursive thought? Right? Because our primary distraction in meditation is thinking, is, getting lost in story in the mind. And so there's kind of 2 different pathways for this, or 2 different ways this manifests. One is to really go for the absence of words in the mind, to really try to bring to stillness the tendency toward distracting thought. So when I bring the attention back to the breath or the posture of the body, or the steadiness of awareness itself, which can be a meditative object, I notice the quieting of of story in the mind, the quieting of words. And noticing that, I give attention to maintaining that silence. So you can really find a space where there's not words going on in the mind. And and it almost feels like listen deeply to that silence in such a way that when words want to start to re-arise, when the next train of thought comes by, it's not that you notice what it is, it talks for a while, and then you come back. You actually feel the impulse toward that train of thought arising, and you just don't get on. So there's really a like, no, I'm committing to silence, and you do it without words, and you see if you can actually stretch out the space in the mind of no words at all. Right? And you could do this. It's a little subtler and sneakier with internal images, because they're very they're such insubstantial energies. The flickering of an image in the mind, it's very difficult to prevent unless you're very deep in concentration. So I don't worry about that too much. It's really the stories that proliferate, that take some work. So one method is to really cut off the story that's happening, hook into a meditative object that is an anchor, that's wordless, like the rising and falling of the breath, the perception of the breath, or the sense of the whole body, or both of those at once, or just the sense of being aware. If you're doing an open awareness practice, just the sense of awareness without words, and sustain that awareness or sustain that contact. A different method for that is more the ignore method. And for me and for some folks, ignore seems easier, but I think it might actually be harder to do well. Ignore is like the mind comes up with a story and it's going to go on doing its thing, and I'm actually just going to let it do that. But I'm primarily with the breath. So this is more like I shift foreground and background. Instead of letting the story be foreground and the breath and body is in the background, I shift those and really focus on breath and body, but I don't try to stop anything. And the story plays on. For myself, I actually don't. I've had maybe what I might call some success in this, but I don't like it as much. It's almost like it doesn't have the same brightness of energy for me. And that's partly, I think, because foreground and background can be so slippery, right? The story can be quite compelling. Our stories usually are. And the thing about the self-protective nervous system, right? It's on the lookout for threat. Part of how that plays out is that it naturally wants to turn toward whatever's the most charged, emotionally charged or intense information coming in through any of the sense doors. So, if I'm looking at a beautiful but calm painting, and it's drawing my attention in, but then there's a loud, startling sound, my attention is going to go to the loud, startling sound because it's more dramatic information than the thing that I'm attending to. If I'm staying with the breath, which for many folks is quite a neutral, calm, steadying object, some story comes in about what I have to do tomorrow, or what's going on with some relationship in my life, or something going on in any way, that's going to have more emotional charge, more punch to it. So it's actually hard to keep the attention from doing its habitual thing of going to the thing that has more emotional charge. But if you can do that, if you can practice with that, you can get good at letting the story kind of arise and pass on its own in the background, keeping something like the breath in the foreground. And bit by bit, I think, like like if you ignore something for a while, it stops arising as much. the ignoring thought starts to give more and more spaces, and you find yourself more and more in the space of, words not arising at all. But what we're going for is, again, not just the quieting of thought, but the retraining of attention toward this calm or serenity or tranquility. And that means really training in deactivation. So it's not so much that, like, yeah, the story had more charge, so I have to resist going to it. But actually, forget about the story. We could say, oh, there's charge arising in the system. This is really the heart of practicing deactivation, is that it's not so much about, like, that I'm seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or sensing or thinking, feeling about something. It's that I sat in meditation with the intention to come to a gathered sense of clarity and to calm and to steady. But then energy that pulls attention away from being gathered has activated. Right? The nervous system has activated for whatever reason. It almost doesn't matter. So then my practice can become, become tuning into activation. All of the hindrances are a kind of activation. All of the defilements are a kind of activation. Every wandering thought has activation in it, right? I wouldn't be pulled into distraction if it didn't have enough activation or charge to pull the attention. And so we want to become skilled at, skilled at noticing activation and rebalancing quickly. And or noticing activation and really understanding that the activation has a wave that it is seeking to resolve. There's a way that activation is coming up because something's unresolved in the system, in the heart mind. And activation almost never resolves by telling the story about why it's activating, which is why the story doesn't resolve on its own. It repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and stirs up emotional reactivity every time. It's partly why talk therapy needs other things besides just telling the story to find resolve, right? It needs different kinds of energies in the relational field, different kinds of somatic contact, different kinds of meaning making to find resolve. But just telling the story doesn't usually resolve activation. It actually generally kicks up activation, right? If you're stuck in dullness and you need more activation, you can tell the story of something that's going on. It'll bring up activation, actually. So if what we're looking for is deactivation, then it's not telling the story that will do that. Often it is because activation is nervous system, it's self-protective. That means it's bodily, it's somatic, it's energetic. Very often then connecting with the bodily, the somatic, energetic is the way to find resolve. So I'm meditating, trying to attend with the breath. Here comes a distraction. I don't actually care what the content is, but I can feel that the charge has a certain flavor. It has the flavor of frustration, or it has the flavor of depression, or it has the flavor of overwhelm, or the flavor of desire, or the flavor of excitement. Whatever it is, there's going to be a tone to it. It wants something, or it wants to run away from something. It wants to become something, to change something. And so, can I feel that arc of activation and feel it in a way where the whole being understands, this is the renunciation piece, understands that it doesn't have to attain anything in the external. That actually this is a desire that doesn't need to be acted on in this moment. This is a leftover desire from an old encounter, or it's a desire about something in the future that I don't need to engage with right now. And in that way, it can just be felt as an arising of energy. It's known just as it arises, as a turning or a blossoming of force through the body mind. And then it settles, and it will. It will. If we don't encourage the story, it goes in waves, and that's just its nature. It'll settle. And deactivation is the downward side of that cycle. So some activation arises. I don't buy into the story, but I feel it. I just let it blossom through. And if I don't get hooked by meaning or story, it'll oscillate, it'll turn, and there'll be a little settling. And on that, with that settling is a kind of deactivation. I want to notice that and let it ride back down, generally to a more settled state than where I began, right? So here I am, I'm vibrating, something arises with some activation, it's going to crest. I don't bite the hook of story. There's a kind of rise. It probably has a kind of emotional, energetic tone to it. I feel it without getting lost, and it settles. This is kind of, in a way, this is basics internal somatic therapy, right? These are the cycles that you would go through with someone else if you were being guided in a somatic context. The thing that is most difficult about practicing in this way is that when the charge is strong, it's very difficult to feel it in the body and ride it through to deactivation without getting caught, right? The charge is strong, we get spun into story, spun into proliferation, and then I'm off. And the trouble with strong activation is that it doesn't always feel like strong activation. When I get lost in a wandering thought where I just kind of like, I'm kind of just like not entirely present, and it's a sort of soft level fantasy, it doesn't feel like some big terrible threat is happening. It's just like, oh yeah, my mind wandered for a while. But if we really tune in, we'll find something, right? And again, it's not in the content, but it's going to be something like there was kind of a dullness or a diffuseness in my attention. So I wasn't really connecting with this moment, with the breath, with the body. I wasn't really engaged. And so there's a kind of flatness, a kind of, it's a little boring when energy is dull like that. And so then here came a thought. Here came a thought about, about something that I'm learning about sauerkraut, because I like making sauerkraut, and somebody said this thing, and then suddenly I'm just thinking about cultures and weights and crocks, and it's not a big deal, right? But if I feel into it, right, it's not about the content, the perfectly benign content of thinking about making sauerkraut. It's that there was a dullness in the system, and this thought of something to do was brighter, had more pull. And so actually I got lost in desire to do something. I really missed that there was something happening. And that thing that was happening was that there was the hindrance of dullness. And it was occluding my ability to gather my attention. And so attention jumped on the first train that was going by the station. And it happened to be the sauerkraut train. It's a very nice train. No problem. But it's not samadhi. So we really can become connoisseurs of this cycling between states of rest and states of activation. And what we're looking for is, what are the conditions to deepen in calm, deepen away from the impulse to wander anywhere for whatever reason. And this means I have to feel safe, settled, comfortable in myself, trusting of the process, willing to be with the neutral, with that which is boring, that which is not yet interesting, able to bring my interest to the process itself. of settling. So really noticing the fluctuations of energy, the fluctuations of attention, how attention gets pulled. This is why the Buddha emphasizes so much, like, understand perception, understand feeling, understand choice, understand the mind. This is really an active cultivation of the, the, the mind's ability that needs to be trained to do just one simple thing for a long time, to really not give in to the momentum toward wandering. The whole first part of cultivating concentration is figuring out how to do this, how to get into what's otherwise an unconscious autonomic system and begin to steer it a little bit, gently, without demanding effort, but without dullness or too much passivity. We actually need to train to not respond to impulses that arise that would pull us away from this gathered state. And so training in this just a little bit every day, you know, is it's like weight training. You know, a little bit every day, you become stronger and stronger. Only the thing that we're training in is not picking things up rather than picking things up. But it takes an extraordinary, subtle but persistent, gentle, but determined kind of force of will to not pick things up. And so it's a strange training, and it's not easy, but it bears tremendous fruit when we give it time, day after day, for a while.